I see you at the liquor store, leaving with the cheapest can of beer on the shelf. You ain't living on the street, but you barely making rent, and I relate because I'm struggling myself. I see you smile at the clerk while you fumble through your purse. I just wish I had a little more to help. I imagine where you live and how you feeling, what you love, and who you'll be if you can make it out your hell. I see you at the bus stop, looking at the sidewalk, smoking half a cigarette, waiting for a ride. Kinda limp when you walk and look away. When you talk, you're ashamed, I can see it in your eyes. Probably got a NASCAR shirt and a car that you love, but you're here cause you're too afraid to drive. It's been almost 10 years since the day that you crashed. Can't forget about the little boy's life. Everybody's got a story. If you look a little closer, you can see it in the wrinkles in their face. They can hide it in the silence, they can bury it and fight it, but it comes out when the hair is turning gray. You can feel it if you touch them, you can tell that they are troubled. You can hear the story running through their veins. We all travel different roads and we put on different clothes. Underneath it all, we're really all the same.
I'll now, without further ado, bring the panel onto the stage to continue this conversation that these poets have so beautifully opened for us tonight. Here to moderate this evening is Monique Mitchell, who is the Community Outreach Coordinator for Get Lit, working with young people on the ground every day. We also are honored to bring back to the stage Kevin Hines, mental health advocate, award-winning global speaker, best-selling author, and documentary filmmaker, to join us again on the stage, as well as Katie Williams, author, who will also have books here for you to purchase at the end. And we have Virginia Hedrick, the Director of Policy and Planning at the California Consortium for Urban Indian Health, and Dr. Curly Bonds, the Director of Clinical Operations for the LA County Department of Mental Health. Will you please welcome them all to the stage tonight for this important conversation?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you to the poets who just graced the stage. And thank you for the ReRise team for creating such a safe space for us to discuss a topic that is not really easily discussed. So before we jump into the panel, I just want to reiterate that there are clinicians on deck to help you if you need help. Please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself in the space. If you need to step out, please feel free to do that. I believe that the clinicians are wearing shirts that say, "Talk to me." And if you don't see them, then someone wearing a ReRise shirt can help you. So again, I would just like to introduce our panelists. We have Virginia Hedrick, who is a member of the Yurok tribe and a director of policy. We have Katie Williams, who is the author of Journey of the Heart, a 17-year-old's journal after losing her brother to suicide. We have Kevin Hines, who directed the beautiful film that you all just witnessed. And we have Dr. Curly Bonds, who is a psychiatrist and the Chief Deputy Director for Clinical Operations for the Department of Mental Health. And again, I am Monique Mitchell. So let's just jump right into this. Virginia, can you please tell us a bit about your experience with suicide and how it is impacting American Indian communities?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here tonight. Like Mo said, I'm a member of the Yurok tribe. It's the largest tribe in California with just over 6,000 members. It's on the Klamath River, 44 miles of the river until the river meets the ocean, 1 mile on both sides. In our community, we experience suicide 14 times the rate of the national average. In 2017, the tribe declared an epidemic of suicide after 7 young people between the ages of 15 and 30 committed suicide in an 18-month period. 7 might not seem like a lot to you all, but this is a community where I grew up. I grew up without electricity, without phone lines. I went to a little school at the end of the road. This is here in California, a 3-room school, kindergarten through 8th. I traveled over 2 hours to get to high school on the neighboring reservation. 7 young lives in 18 months is a lot when you're talking about a community of just under 300 people in a very remote area. I now classify myself an urban Indian. I live and work in Sacramento. I went to school in Los Angeles and am one of just a few of my family who live off reservation. And the urban Indian experience, while different than on reservation, we still experience suicide rates higher than those on those of our non-Indian counterparts in the area. And so the issue is close to my heart. I am Safe Talk trained, which is a curriculum to help people notice the signs and keep people safe. So that's why I'm here tonight, and I appreciate you, and I just want to thank, we're on the land here as the Tongva people, the ancestral people of Los Angeles, who are still living and breathing in this area where these buildings are on their sacred territory. And so in my way, you always acknowledge where you are first. And so again, I thank the Tongva people and the people who come before me and the generations that will come after me.
Thank you. Katie, how have you in particular been impacted by suicide, and what do you hope to add to the conversation?
I think suicide is one of those things that's hard to talk about, and it's often something people don't want to talk about. It's a dark thing. It can be a very heavy thing. My personal experience is my 17-year-old brother took his life when we were in high school. I was 16, he was 17, and I started keeping a journal shortly after he died. I did that for about 3.5 years. Promised I'd never show anyone, right? Because who shares their journal? What teenage girl shares her journal? So I kept that hidden under my bed, and after encouragement from some friends, they said, why don't you publish that? I think you can help people. And so I ended up sharing my book. And really, in my hope in that sharing my journal is that, one, not only if you've already been impacted by suicide, and as many of you might be aware, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention will tell you it's almost 45,000 people in our country every single year. And to me, that's just too many. And knowing that my brother's a part of that, I want to really turn the tide on that and change that. So one is to share if you've already been impacted by suicide, you're going to make it. It might not seem like it at the time, but you will. That's one. But I would say even more importantly than just being a companion for those who've been impacted is to share the warning signs so that others know it's okay to reach out and get help, and you can help save a life by knowing those warning signs. Because I've seen many of my friends be able to do that by my sharing my story. So I'll tell everyone. I'll tell the Lyft driver. I'll tell someone on the sidewalk. I'll speak with all of you tonight. I feel very just on fire and passionate about it. By sharing those warning signs, we can help save a life. It's too late for my family, unfortunately, but it's not too late for those of our family and friends in our life right now.
Thank you, Katie. I will ask both of you about the warning signs for suicide, especially coming from different perspectives, you with the American Indian community, and then also I would like to know what advice you all have for young people of color who are often not validated in their experience with mental illness, and they're told that depression isn't a real thing. What advice you would give them. But first, I would like to keep speaking to the panelists. So, Kevin, I really loved what you said earlier about how to offer love and empathy to yourself, especially when you're in the good times, because that's when you can program it for those dark spaces. What are some of the ways that you offer love and empathy to yourself?
I read lots of comic books. I draw. I write. I listen to music that is positive and life-changing, meaning that I listen to music often that has the power to change brainwaves and brain patterns in a positive way. All music does that, but if we listen to aggressive, angry, dark, violent, misogynistic, hateful, spiteful music, that is what we become. But if we listen to music that is therapeutic, kind, compassionate, loving, and beautiful, that's also what we become. So I do a lot of self-care in the way of exercise, eating healthily, educating myself as to my diagnosis. Every time there's a new treatment for bipolar disorder, I'm up on that, and I know what to do to manage my own pain. And I take this wellness regime very seriously. I have a regimen and a routine that I stick to, and it's ice cold, and I don't play with it, because every time in the past that I've let that routine go, I've ended up in a psych ward where I've been assaulted or stopped a rape from happening, or, you know, it's been a really rough and long road, but the journey is clear. Take care of myself so I can love everyone I need to. My family, my friends, all of you.
Love that. Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Bonds, what resources are available to survivors or people who are contemplating suicide? And can you please speak to preventative efforts?
Sure. First of all, I feel like I need to give props to my fellow panelists who are brave enough to come out on a Friday night and talk about what is a very difficult topic. As a representative for the Department of Mental Health, you all should know that we have a wonderful resource in LA County. The department is the largest in the country. It's the largest public mental health system that we have, and we treat thousands of people every year. And through those resources, we have clinicians who are trained to help people who have suicidal thoughts. There are hotlines. I would give out the numbers, but there are several. I would say that we hold now in our hands these little devices where we can kind of Google almost anything and realize that in the same way that you might get resources for anything from cancer to Lyme disease, mental health problems and suicide are there too. One that I do remember is the crisis line, 8777-CRISIS, that you can call. It's a 24-hour crisis line that operates throughout LA County. They take calls from people who are suffering, who are struggling, and it's really about figuring out where you are and where you need to be. Getting to a clinician who understands you is not always easy, and many times people who are having suicidal thoughts are going to approach a neighbor, a coach, a teacher, a person who they're friends with, a playmate, person that they're in a relationship with. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to learn what we can about suicide and prevention. The young woman from the Native American tribe mentioned ASSIST, or Safe Talk, which is a special training. It's essentially like CPR for suicide. There are groups that do these types of trainings, and now I think there have been efforts to have a lot of people who are teachers, babysitters, coaches trained in this, because in the same way that if we walked upon somebody who had chest pain, who was struggling to breathe, we would know, hey, this person needs to get help. The same thing is true when a person talks about their desire to end their life. Death by suicide, in my mind as a clinician, is not a choice. It's something where your thinking becomes distorted and you get into this very, very dark place that it feels that it's inescapable. But people who are suicidal or who are having suicidal thoughts will give what we term invitations. And that might sound like an odd term, but I think anybody who's been trained in this area knows that that invitation may take the form of just kind of floating out of the thought balloon. You know, I don't know if I can make it through today. They might say something like, I don't know if I can go on, or maybe people would be better off if I weren't here. When you hear those types of things, be attuned to listen, because that's step one that we can do as citizens to help someone else, to be attuned and be willing to listen. And then when you do that listening, the other part of prevention is to find out, is this something that we need to do something right now about? And I appreciate what Kevin was saying earlier about, I need help right now. Because, you know, if I have a little bit of oozing, maybe a little bit of achy pain, maybe it can wait a while. But sometimes with suicide, the intervention needs to happen immediately. And pick up the phone, you can dial 911 in the same way that you would for someone who's having a seizure or having a stroke. You wouldn't wait around and think, maybe this is gonna go away, maybe this will get better. And calling those resources doesn't necessarily mean that that person who's struggling is gonna be whisked off, put in an ambulance and taken to a hospital and locked up for the indefinite period. It could just very well mean helping them to find a community resource like a community mental health center, a clinic, a place where they can go to get therapy or counseling. Fortunately in LA, there are all different ranges of therapy, whether you have no insurance, limited insurance, or private insurance. It's about availability, and the numbers that you'll find that link you to resources will help you find the resources that will fit whatever type of resources you have. The last thing I'll say, which is about the issue of suicide in minority groups, I have certain Google alerts on my phone, and I tend to be an early riser. I guess it's the curse of being a doctor. This morning at around 5:30, one that came up was talking about suicide in African-American boys in particular, teenage boys. Historically, although suicide doesn't discriminate, it hits all ethnic groups, all age groups, all walks of life in terms of socioeconomic status. But the one thing that's coming out is that certain groups that have had a historically lower rate of suicide compared to others, like African Americans, there are a lot of reasons why it might have been lower, but now I think there is an increase in those rates, and it's partly due to a number of reasons: broken families, incarceration, lack of access to resources, but we don't fully understand why those things are happening. But a lot of times it's about finding providers and resources that look like and can understand you. And it doesn't have to be that, but I think getting more people who are motivated to become helpers and trained in mental health and to increase the diversity of our pipeline of trainers. We're trying to do that with our department, but I think for now it's just realizing that it doesn't matter what someone looks like, they could have the same type of symptom in terms of suicidal thoughts. It doesn't discriminate. It's an illness, it's a symptom in the same way that medical illness is a symptom, and we need to address it.
Thank you. So I would like to talk about what are some of the ways that I'm sure there's a lot of audience members who are not dealing with suicidal ideation, but maybe a loved one is. So what are some ways that we can support our loved ones in order to make them feel empowered and to let them know that they are in control?
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier as we were all discussing how this evening would go, and something I wanted to share with you all in the room, and to get to your earlier question, American Indian people experience something that's called historical trauma, and this is when a group of people have been collectively impacted by specific trauma. Tongva being one, where are the people? There's no acknowledgement in this city to them. That's a trauma, a repetitive trauma that people from this area experience. Removal from their homeland to another area, to a reservation. Many of you probably have driven right through reservations or by them and not even known it. That's the invisibility of American Indians. We often say we're the most invisible race there is, because you won't see us when you see a panel of public health indicators, and other races we're too small, the sample size is too small, it's not statistically significant. And then what's the impact when you're literally erased from history in those ways? And even in present day public health data reports, we're erased from those spaces. And so what's that generational trauma, and how does that impact us? The other piece I would add is, when we look at something like suicide and how it impacts communities, I think we have to look at it very holistically. So mental health, traditional, what we would consider Western practices and models are one way of addressing the issue. But as Indian communities and traditional people and people with a religious base, we also have to look about how our culture can better support us and how we can look at the resources we have. And so I was sharing with some folks earlier that it's my belief that I've been raised that in all of us exist both life and death from the time that you're born. Life and death spirit is in all living things. All things have a life cycle. And I think as Indigenous people, we've long recognized that, and our ceremonies around death can sometimes look a lot different than in other cultures. Sometimes they're a celebration of life. And that's kind of counter to what we see sometimes in mainstream society. And so what happens from a spiritual aspect is something has been then feeding this death spirit. And maybe it is a mental health diagnosis. Maybe it's trauma. In the community I'm from, one of the questions that was asked was, did these young men have food in the house? Was there a lack of food? Were drugs and alcohol present? What has been feeding this death spirit? And then what can we do to feed this life spirit? Is it ceremony? Is it family? Is it love? Is it prayer? Is it a clinician? What is it? And being open to looking at all of those things holistically. And maybe it is that healing for the entire family, because what we saw in our community was brothers, people in the same household. One of my closest friends from suicide stood in his backyard and died by suicide in the exact same spot, planted his feet in the same spot that his older brother had died by suicide 5 years prior when we were in high school. These are generational things, and he did it there because he wanted to honor his brother and he wanted to end the pain, and he did it very suddenly. And these things are normalized, right? So at that time, we weren't in a crisis, and we weren't making the LA Times, and we weren't talking about this because these things were felt, again, invisibly and silently. And so if I could just encourage communities to talk about, communities of color, exactly like you said, how can we address these issues right now? There's a $10 million ask of the state budget to address Native youth issues. And it seems like, there's this policy plug, but there are Native youth issues that we're all seeing around us and that we're not seeing around us. And I think as a community, we have to begin to acknowledge who is around us, what are we experiencing, and what can we do as a community to support one another. And I see that on these signs, like if one of us isn't well, we're all not well. And I think that's a long-held belief within Indigenous communities that I'm happy to see in more broader community spaces, because I think that is really the truth. We all have to be, we're all connected in that way. And there's, old tribal sayings that we're all related and we're all family in one way or another. And I think in this Western mainstream society, we have to begin to acknowledge that, or we're going to continue to see crises like suicide, like the opioid crisis, and these things that are damaging our communities if we don't collectively take ownership of the issue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Kevin, I would like to hear from you. What are some ways, as someone who has dealt with suicidal ideation, what are some ways that you would advise loved ones of those who are also battling this? How can they help them in a way that makes them feel empowered?
I often think about how some people treated me in psych wards and how some family members just didn't show up. And when I look back at the 7 psych ward stays I've been in, and I look back at when I called those people and said, please show up, and they didn't, it broke me. In the 7 psych wards I've been in, 6 people came regularly. And the people I called otherwise that I wanted to come, they didn't have the time, energy, or ability because it was too painful for them, but I needed them. And I think about how we look at and marginalize our young people who battle mental and brain pain. We have to treat them first as human beings with feelings and emotions and mental stability and instability, and second, treat them as a consumer or a patient. I hate both those words. We're not consumers. We're not a bunch of shoppers at Target. I mean, we are, but that's not that's a problem. But we are at the root, all of us in this kind of pain are citizens of hope, trying to find it, trying to stay here. And when the people we love don't show up, it breaks us. So show up, meet the person in pain where they're at, not where you want them to be. Recognize that they're the one going through it, even though they're causing tertiary and secondary pain to the rest of the family. They're the ones that are battling the darkness inside of them, and it is thriving. Reach into that darkness and shine some light with unconditional love, complete empathy, a total lack of judgment, and constant, unrelenting care.
Thank you. So I am a poet by trade, and everything that they're saying, I'm like, yes, we are citizens of hope. Yes, life spirit. So on the topic of art, since We Rise is an art festival, I'm looking at this piece here. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And it's my understanding or experience in life that in the most adverse circumstances, in the darkest of circumstances, we're able to glean a light that we didn't know existed within us. And Katie, you and Kevin as well, you both have created these potent pieces of art that are helping other people in their healing journeys. And I would like to hear more in particular about how art and creativity helped heal you.
Yeah, I think writing is very therapeutic. I don't know what to do with a paintbrush. I'm horrible with a pencil. If I try to do a sketch, I admire when someone can. I've never made a film. I admire that as well. I think whatever outlet we have, as a 16-year-old, I had a pen and a notebook, and that was my way. It's still my way. Yeah, I think it's so healing, I think, to review your old work as well. Something about journaling, I don't know if many people in here do it, I'm seeing nods, just even as a regular practice. You know where you were 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and the things you were thinking about and the things you were worried about? Some of them have already gone away from today. Not to minimize anything large going on. They don't all go away, but it's such a perspective giver. So art for me has always been words. So in the notebook and reaching out to people, and I found that to be extremely helpful, and I still do. And then other people's art helps me to see things in a new perspective as well.
Thank you. Kevin?
went through the gallery 3 times while you guys were watching the film, and I gotta tell you, I am more inspired by the We Rise event here than I've been in a long time. And looking at the history of brain, mind, behavioral, and mental health through the lens of the artist, and getting to meet some of the artists here today, it's changing me, you know? Before I ever made a film or wrote a book, I have hundreds of sketchbooks since kindergarten, mostly filled with superheroes and supervillains that I would make up and create. And I wrote stories for every single one of these characters, and they're just for me. And one of the things that I realized at 16, when my mom looked at something I thought was a masterpiece, and she goes, "Kevin, it's terrifying. It's dark, it's violent, it's aggressive, it's angry, it's got red demon eyes." And she went on, and I said, "Mom, no, it's a masterpiece." And she goes, "No, Kevin, look at it. Look at how terrifying it is." And I stopped. And I stopped drawing for a while. And then I was in my 3rd psych ward stay, and I made a decision that every drawing I would go and create from that day forward, no one would ever say anything about it, but that's beautiful. That's hopeful. It's filled with light and love. And I stopped drawing terrifying things that I was seeing in my head, because I have auditory and visual hallucinations on a regular basis. I see things that nobody should see, that terrify me on a regular basis, that nobody else can see. And that's where that came from. But when I draw things that are beautiful, I think beautiful thoughts. And when I think beautiful thoughts, I do beautiful things. And I embody that beauty with what I draw, and it helps me. So that's art therapy for all of us. Your writing is your therapy, and this is my therapy. And every sketchbook I finish until the day I die of natural causes will be filled with beauty.
Thank you. So I have a question for Virginia and Dr. Bonds. Obviously, the crisis amongst suicide rates with young people of color are spiking, and that is a cultural problem that we need to solve on the cultural level or the societal level. But what are some things that, if I'm an audience member and I want to help counteract this, what are some things that I could do to help?
Yeah, I think acknowledging, so Dr. Bonds mentioned earlier the talk curriculum, the Safe Talk curriculum is about listening to the invitations when someone's trying to tell you. And you mentioned earlier in your earlier question, you asked, that often people aren't believed, or, in communities of color, it's minimized. We shouldn't talk about it. It's shameful. So to listen to those invitations when someone is telling you something, and to ask them directly, and then to be there with them and stay with them and listen to what they're experiencing. You don't always have to understand it. And so I have a 17-year-old son, and he gets really worked up about things that I'm like, this is not a big deal. I'm telling you, it's not. In a week from now, you won't even think about this girl. But he'll be so worked up, I can't eat, and he's having all of this, just stress and just drama about it. And I have to remember that our experiences are different, and I don't have to understand what he's experiencing, but I can empathize. And I may not even be able to validate it because it's not my experience, but I do need to hear him out and understand that I understand where he's coming from and see what it is that he needs. What is it? Is it space? Is it just to listen, just to sit and listen? Sometimes that's all our young people need, is someone to hear their whole story and not tell them that it was wrong or that that's not how it happened, or to get over it. I think in communities of color, and particularly in Indian country, we experience so much trauma. I was sharing earlier that I have been to I can't even name all the funerals that I've been to, that it's just a normal part of life. And so for me to tell my dad, funerals make me really sad, he's like, get over it. get over it. Like that can't make you sad. Get over it. And that's just like one small example of where how your feeling might be minimized, because everyone's been through that. There's like a scale of sexual abuse. Well, how bad was it? Like, what really happened? That's not so bad. Like that kind of happens to everybody, right? So that shouldn't be the thing that gets you down. Like, move on from it. And I think those kinds of behaviors where we normalize trauma, or we become desensitized to something that may actually impact somebody far greater than it impacts you, and to be able to hear them out, even if it's not something that you understand, is really important across communities.
Well, I don't know if I could say it any better than Virginia and Kevin here, but as a professional, I know that when I work with individuals who are having thoughts about suicide, and I try to work with their families as well, because it doesn't happen in isolation. On average, a person who dies from suicide, it affects at least 6 other people. So if we were to do an experiment to say, everybody who's been touched by suicide, by the time we got to the end of that experiment, everybody in the room would be standing. And not just because this is a specialized audience, but because it's that broad in its scope. The first thing I would say is, don't feel like you need to do it all yourself. Realize that there are professionals out there who are trained and who are available. And yes, sometimes they're busy, so you're not always going to get them. So there are times when you do have to step in. But a part of it, I think, is the responsibility of us as relatives, friends, family members, and even the person who might be having suicidal thoughts, to come up with what I would call a safety plan. And you'll hear this referred to as when you're doing well, when you're having a good day. Think about, what can I do to feel better when I'm having one of those down days? And we all have those down days. Traffic, got to pay my phone bill, miss my bus. Those are all the sorts of things that can be temporary. But for someone who's having depression and cognitive distortions that come from that depression, it can seem overwhelming. So a lot of our job is to make them realize that they may feel like they can only reach this far, but through our support, through our empathic listening, they can reach this far. They can reach a lot further. So it's about being there, being an ear for people to listen to, and it's not always easy. I'll say it, having talked with members of my family who have had those thoughts, talking on the phone, on call, with a patient or a client or a member, or I don't like that word consumer either, but someone who's receiving services. A lot of times it's about just being there for them, just knowing that you're a phone call away, and knowing that when they're feeling low, I think Kevin alluded to this, having a list of things, be it going to the gym, going for a walk, maybe having a healthy meal. Sometimes it's going to be about spirituality. I definitely agree with Virginia. Some of the first lines for people who are experiencing distress are the clergy. Going to talk to someone who's got that training and helping to work with them so that they know about resources as well. And I would say that in communities of color, a lot of times people won't speak the word suicide. They'll use something else. I can't speak to every ethnic group, but I know a lot of times people who talk about it from the African American perspective will talk about feeling down and out, feeling that they're having the blues, things are getting on my nerves. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be attuned to, because they're going to look different in every cultural population. And in some places, the ability to talk about it still doesn't exist. And that's where I would say this space, this art, what is in a sacred space, and I think we made it a different type of sacred space than it was originally intended. It gives you an expression, it gives you an outlet, and you don't have to be a famous, talented artist to be able to scribble down things in the margin of a notebook or to write down your thoughts in a creative way, because that's a way for those really, really negative thoughts to have a place. And sometimes you can take that and make your own ceremony with it. Maybe it's going to be putting it in a bottle and sending it off. Maybe it's going to be lighting it a fire. Maybe it's going to be just putting it aside so that when you're having some better thoughts, you can look back and think, oh, my goodness, this is how bad it was. Because sometimes it's that ability to turn the page in that journal to the good times. People get stuck on the bad times. So it's about reminding yourself that things can get better, and to have what I call a wellness recovery action plan, a WRAP plan. What's going to help you during those down moments to feel better?
Thank you. So something you said in that answer was that in the African American community, depression and suicide are often not called by their names, which made me think of when I was in high school and I was suffering from depression. I didn't know how to tell my grandmother that, so all I could tell her was, I don't feel well. And she's like, okay, I'll make a doctor's appointment for you. And I said, no, I don't feel well. So what would you tell a young person who's in our audience today who doesn't feel well, who is suffering from depression or anxiety, but maybe doesn't have the money to go see a specialist? What are the resources out there for them?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Mental Health is really there as the safety net. And I speak because I'm someone who's worked on both sides, academics, private practice. But the people who walk into our clinics usually don't have resources. Some do, but the majority of them have either no insurance or they have Medi-Cal. So it's really the very, very basic coverage. Even with that, you can get access to what I consider therapy that's world-class. I would say that within the Department of Mental Health are a lot of talented professionals, mostly licensed, board certified, people that are supervised, and those are throughout the entire county. We have a huge county, and there are places where we could do better, and that's part of what this effort here is about, to prove that with outreach to the communities that don't normally talk about these things, we can get these conversations going. I mean, Art brought a lot of you here. I don't know if it was social media or if it was word of mouth, but I think a lot of times in our country, in our society, these are taboo topics, and certainly in communities of color, it's about recognizing them for what they are, but also recognizing that you might need to go talk to a professional and to realize that mental health professionals are health professionals.
Thank you. And what would you, and this is a question for all of you, so mental health is stigmatized within our society and people are made to feel weird or strange or broken and defected if they are dealing with mental health issues. So how can we help normalize it, in your opinion, or how can we help our loved ones feel like they are sane even though they're battling something? It doesn't make them defected.
One of the things that my wife and I did was we founded a collective called Conquer, CNQR, Courage to Talk About Your Mental Health, and for normalize the conversation of brain, mind, behavioral mental health. Q for ask the question, are you suicidal and do you have a plan? R for recovery, because no matter who you are, it is possible with treatment, care, love, and affection. And so this idea that we can all conquer our pain is synonymous with every person who's ever been in pain. How many of you in this room, by a raise of hands, have never been in pain? If you've never been in pain, raise your hands. Exactly, right? So when we look into how we can change the tide and defect the norm, what we must do is recognize every single person in pain and help them understand that their voice matters and is being listened to and heard deeply. And that when you're in pain and you're silencing it, we're going to come to you and say, no, you get to share it. You're no burden to me, and we got your back. And in doing so, what we find with the tools we bring around the world with the Conquer Collective and these 40-odd folks from around the world who are sharing stories of triumph over adversity from pain. And they're sharing it in a science-based, evidence-informed, appropriate way that's safe messaged, and they talk about the method, but then they talk about how they live, stay, and exist in recovery now. When you do that, when you show youth that there are ways to be in recovery every day, and here are some tools and steps you can take every single moment, every day, to change the rest of your life, it has an effect. It has a ripple effect. And in doing so, we conquer our pain, and we do it together as a team, because we are all our brothers and sisters keepers. And that is what we were meant to be from the very beginning.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that, I think, one way that I was raised is that words are powerful. Our words are medicine. They have power. They have the ability to change the course of life. And so for when I was first trained in this, I was really struggling with, I don't want to ask somebody, are you considering suicide? Like, I didn't want to use the word suicide. And I really had to like think introspectively, like, why don't I want to use the word suicide? Kept like saying, I want to say it this way and I want to ask it that way. And my trainer, my mentor was like, you have to say suicide. And I started to like really think like, well, what are the cultural taboos? Am I speaking it? Like, am I going to give this suicide spirit life if I say the word suicide? And I really had to come to this place where we have to say the word suicide, and it sort of makes your stomach turn the first time you do it, but you have to take power over it and be able to say it directly, even if it's scary, and to know that you might choke it out when somebody asks you, I need help now, it's going to feel really scary, like you don't want to be that person. I had a sibling tell me, I don't want that training, Virginia, I don't want that training because I'm too vulnerable. Like, I don't want to be that person. I'll take them food. I don't want to be that person. I'm like, it's too late. You have to be that person. We all have to be that person, even if it makes you feel sick and even if you're scared, because the Creator has put you in that position for a reason. And I think just to acknowledge that, we're all in this room here tonight hearing what we're hearing because you're supposed to be here. Like, there is no accidents when we're in a room together, right? And so the people who are here hearing this message are here for a reason, and maybe you're here working and you're volunteering and you're here for some other reason, but you're here to hear this message and you're in this room for a purpose, and that Creator has us on this world for a purpose. And sometimes there's this dark spirit that tries to take over, and we have to reach out for help, to have somebody else help us. I can't see it anymore. I'm so far down, I can't see it, but I want to see it. And we use this example of, trees like breaking through concrete, and sometimes you'll see weeds coming up through the cracks. Like, life has the ability to do that. It will seek light. It will seek light. If there's any way possible, it will find it, and to be that light for other people, and to be brave enough, like you said, to be brave enough to know when you need help, when you know you're not going to be able to see it for yourself and you need help, to be able to ask those 4 powerful words that you shared earlier, how powerful they are and how much medicine is packed in them when you say that, and that the first person might be too scared, and to ask the next person and to just keep asking.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to answer that question?
What I'm hearing kind of throughout here is the theme of listening, is of hearing people. And I think in our modern culture, we're surrounded by screens. We're lonelier than ever. There's a lot of studies about that. And I think really what we're saying is that ability to extend the hand. And just a story to illustrate that, when my brother was 17, when he was upset and when he was just kind of what I thought having a moment as his sister, just wondering kind of what's happening with you. And we'd be in the kitchen talking, and he'd be upset and he'd say, well, I'll just kill myself, or no one will miss me if I'm gone, or you will miss me then if I'm gone. And he would find these ways to say that. And in my mind, as his little sister, I'm thinking, oh, you don't mean, like, there's so many ways to dismiss it. Oh, you're young, or you don't mean that, or oh, you're having a rough day or something. And I really relate to you sharing your story, Kevin, because I think, man, had I known the warning signs, I would have taken it seriously. Like, that's the one thing that I think about with my brother. He said it. He made it so obvious. He said, I'll kill myself. And I didn't believe him. We didn't believe him because I found a way to justify it. What do you mean? You come from a great family. You're a good-looking kid. You have all these friends. What is there not to live for? So I would never take him seriously. And so in my mind, I think about listening. Now I know if someone says they're going to take their life, take them seriously and get that help. And you can call those hotlines, as we had mentioned earlier. And you can even call if you're supporting a friend and you think something's not right. I had a friend that we were talking about this topic. He knows about my brother. He knows the warning signs. We were talking about it. 2 weeks go by and he calls me out of the blue, says, Katie, something's not right. I think my friend might be suicidal. I got a text out of the blue. He said, hey man, thanks for being such a good friend. Da, 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 da. And he looks at his phone. Why is this guy, we have plans to hang out. What is he texting me? Thank you for being a good friend. So my friend calls me. I get a little more information. I said, you're absolutely right. That's a cry for help. That's a warning sign. He's saying his goodbyes. He's putting his affairs in order. And so thank God in the right time, he was able to get his family there and the ambulance, got him to the hospital and saved this kid's life. And it's just because my friend recognized one warning sign, because this kid was starting to say his goodbyes, this young man. And so what a gift we all have to be that light in someone's life and to recognize that sign. It only takes one moment to just acknowledge that, and they can make a different decision and change their life because they're going to reach their hand out. So that's what I would just share about helping others.
Thank you.
I would just add to that, as a physician, I know that as a psychiatrist, I've gotten occasionally well, why didn't you become a real doctor? And, my response to that is I might save more lives by being at a place like this tonight than I would in an emergency room doing a cardiac arrest massage or something. But the reality is that we as a society have put mental health sometimes last, and it needs to be first. The disability globally from depression is as serious as heart disease, cancer, and other illnesses. But unlike those other illnesses, we don't always advocate for mental illness and for those who have them, or brain diseases. I prefer that word sometimes myself, because you can go to the beach on any given Sunday and see the people out practicing for the breast cancer walk or the leukemia run or the AIDS marathon. But what about mental health? I think we need to take it upon ourselves to wear the green buttons or the green ribbons like I am, and to also talk about and tell our stories. During my first year of medical school, I lost my mom, and she was my rock. And it's amazing that I even graduated after that semester, because it really plummeted me into a serious depression. And you know what? I started listening to what they had told me during freshman orientation. Get help. It really benefited me, and it probably is the reason that I went into psychiatry as opposed to some other specialty where I would have had a more glamorous lifestyle and made more money. But the reality is that, like I said, mental health is sometimes put last. I think we need to be the ones with our tweets and our Facebooks and our Snapchats to do the screens, do the hashtags, tell people that you're here, tell them what you're talking about, let them know that this is something that's really important. And I think it's only when we all start coming out of the shadows, coming out from underneath, and letting those seeds grow into something real, that this is going to be truly a movement. And I think we're starting with that.
Thank you. So I've heard each of you, I think, individually speak a little bit about warning signs. Can I please hear from all of you, what are some warning signs that we can look out for?
Yeah, one that sticks with me that's really difficult. So again, I had a family member who was with a young man the night before he committed suicide, and he said something that was troubling, and she said, and it just didn't feel right. Like when I think back to the night, it didn't feel good when he was sitting in my car. And it's a real thing. If something doesn't feel right, if it just doesn't feel right, even if they haven't said their thing or you have no reason to believe it and you think, oh, I'm just making this up. If it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel right, if you feel like something is wrong, that's enough of an invitation to trust your gut, trust that the notion that something might be wrong, and better to be wrong than to have been right and missed it.
Katie?
Yeah, there's a long list that comes to my brain the
Please,
moment
give us
you
the
say
long
that.
list.
And you can find, for reference, you can find all of these on the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But there's behaviors and there's moods. There's different things that happen. So one of the things is if someone says they're going to take their life, that's one. Another is retreating from activities they used to enjoy, isolating from family and friends, increased use of drugs and alcohol, sleeping too much or too little. There's really a lot of components that can go into it, right? Because there's a medical component, a behavioral component. So there's a lot of things you can look out for, but one of those other things to kind of later down the line to really be aware of, and I alluded to it earlier, but is when someone starts saying their goodbyes. They might not use the words goodbye, but they're doing that last reach. My brother, the day before he died, came to school, not to go to class, of course, but to see his friends. And he came to school and was just going around the parking lot in the morning, making sure he saw everybody. And I heard later, your brother was in the park. My brother? I didn't think he was coming to class anymore. You know, and he was there to say his goodbyes. And the night before he died, he was on the phone time and again. He would make one call, hang up, start the next, because he was making his final outreach and saying his goodbyes. So that's a really big one. And we mentioned, you know, substance abuse. And the other thing you can watch for is a mood lift. And again, this is something that is one of those warning signs that later on in someone's life, it's typically, unfortunately, when someone has decided that they're going to take their life and they feel better. Because suicide is not about wanting to die. It's about wanting to end the pain, right? Someone gets in tunnel vision. It's not that they don't love their family and friends. It's not about circumstances in their life that might be going right. It's about that tunnel vision. And so sometimes at the end of someone's life, there'll be a mood lift because they feel better because they decided to take their life. They decided this is my way out. So unfortunately, sometimes a family member will take it the opposite and say, look, they're getting better. The medication's working, or the counseling is working, or whatever the kind of help they were getting. And so that's just something to be aware of. And just that isolation, you know, that pulling away.
Thank you.
Before I took the bus to the Golden Gate, I gave away all my prized possessions. I gave away every trophy I'd ever won in sport, and I had a lot, to my friends who were like, dude, we don't want this. We didn't earn it. But I was like, no, you should have that. You should really have that, because I don't need it anymore. I gave away my entire 20 boxes of comic books to my little brother who creases comic books. That was completely illogical. But it just goes to show you, like, he wouldn't have taken care of them like I took care of them and kept them in mint condition. He would have destroyed them. But I gave them everything. And nobody noticed that I brought over 20 boxes of comic books from my dad's house to my mom's house, and I had a friend of mine use his truck to do so. So that was a big sign that I was planning to leave this earth, because I was giving away everything that mattered to me. And finally, I gave away all of my 400 CDs, my CD collection back when those were real things, to a guy who was a friend of a friend. I gotta call him and get that back. My Rakim CD's in there. I gotta get that. But I gave all this away in one day, the day before. So just be aware that if someone is giving away something that they've loved for their entire life or for a long time, that's a big sign that they're planning on exiting this earth.
These folks could write the textbook, honestly. I'm sitting here thinking at a loss because Kevin stole mine. One of my biggest regrets, and fortunately the person who I was working with lived through their attempt, but she had a bunch of cats. This was one of those people that euphemistically cat lady. And she came in week after week telling me about how, you know, she'd gone down from 8 cats to 6. And I thought, oh, well, this is because she's normalizing her life. She's getting down to maybe 1 or 2 cats. What it didn't trigger for me at the point was that those cats for her were her prized possession. And looking back on that, that would have been a big red flag for me. I will use the excuse I was earlier in my career and didn't pick up on what was a big warning sign. The other thing I think is that sense of giving up. People who maybe have been really into something, you know, their sport, their art, taking care of themselves. Dilapidation is a word that we use for it sometimes in the medical field. Someone who's always put together, makeup, clothes to the nines, and they show up and they look kind of like, you know, they just rolled out of bed. That's a warning sign too. People that are really changing. By the same token, someone who's always been kind of a schlub and they all of a sudden are looking really good, maybe it's that boost that someone was talking about. So changes that are dramatic can be warning signs.
Thank you. So we've spoken about how we can help our loved ones who are dealing with suicidal ideation and how to help them feel empowered. Now I would like to hear from you all on how we can take care of ourselves while aiding these loved ones, because obviously if you're helping someone, you're a really empathic person, but in spaces like this, it's very important to make sure that you're taking care of yourself or putting on the proverbial oxygen mask. So what are some ways that we can take care of ourselves while we deal with this?
Yeah, first and foremost for me is always prayer. To whatever your faith base is, to have prayer in your life and be able to pray about those things. and then to be able to share them with someone. So whether that's seeing, a licensed clinician or a friend, but, having a person or several people that you can let release some. And there's ceremonies around releasing grief and pain. And even when you've taken on somebody else's pain, good ways of releasing it. Those are a couple of things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, it's so individual, isn't it? What we each need, and even day to day, what each of us needs, prayer for certain. And people that really feed you and that you really pour into each other, right? That you really, that feed you, that's what helps me. And then just exercise, getting those natural endorphins going, that helps a lot. And I'll say in recent years, this took me later in my adulthood to figure out, but I'm born and raised LA. I don't know if we have a lot of, locals in the room or if a lot of you have come in, but we're a busy culture. You know that? We're so busy all the time. And I fell into that trap of overscheduling myself and not really having time to just kind of come down and just kind of have a chill night sometimes, So I found that to be very helpful for me for self-care. And then because we're talking about mental health and everything, I think it's becoming more common and acceptable of just seeing a counselor, having a check-in. Why is it okay to do an annual physical with a doctor and, it's recommended? And then what about for your mind? What about to just talk to somebody, right? It's kind of what we've been talking about today. So even, seeing a counselor, I think it's kind of a bundle, at least for me. It's people, exercise, my counselor, my good friends from my church who I know just have my back and we pray for each other. And then just like watching a funny movie. I mean, come on, what's better than Will Ferrell for me? I mean, that's like, let me just watch some comedy, So those are like those little things, and it's not a scheduled thing all the time necessarily. I think it's like kind of feeling, okay, today is going to be this type of a day. But yeah, there's so many things just little things that help. Yeah.
Practicing gratitude every day is what helps me get through the day when I'm in pain. Right now, some of you might notice that I'm grimacing a lot. I'm in chronic 24/7, 365 physical pain. I have been for 11 weeks. I have an autoimmune disease caused by the very medication that's trying to save my life mentally. It's poisoning my organs after 20 years of use. So for me, practicing gratitude every day for everything I get to do, because I almost wasn't here twice. Every person I come into contact with, being grateful for their existence and their light that shines in this world, and practicing gratitude for every single thing I get to do, because it's a gift. That for me gets me through the hardest times and the worst days, being grateful for the people, the places, and the things that are in my life, every single one of them. And recognizing that without you, I can't be me.
I wouldn't be a psychiatrist if I couldn't quote Sigmund Freud. And he talked about the three drives in life, or the three important things: to live, to work, and to play, or to love, to work, and to play. And I think sometimes work in a place like LA, I agree, we get over busy, we get overscheduled, overcommitted. So it's about work-life balance. I think the generation that came behind me has this a lot better than I do. If there are flexible work schedules that allow you to reduce your commute, work from home, talk with your employers about some of those things, because it might improve your life, not just for now, but for the long run. It might help you to live longer. I would also add that think about mental health as being something in the same way that you do dental care. We go in and we get checked out. It's not because we have teeth that are falling out, because we don't want them to fall out. So sometimes if you're having a question, there are now more screens like the Patient Health Index or questionnaire, primary care. You can download it online, the PHQ-9, to just do a checkup. You can use all of these tools that are at our disposal through the internet to find out, hey, is this a little problem? Is this just a little rash? Is this just a little dandruff? Or is this something more serious? So a lot of those scales, like the PHQ-9, the JD7 for anxiety, the generalized anxiety disorder scale. Those are things that are in the public domain that you can go and you can look up, you can Google them, and then you can do a test. And if you take that paper into your doctor, now more and more physicians, not just psychiatrists, are trained to understand the idea of patient-involved or participant healthcare. Someone who's really invested, who brings into me a printout to say, hey, I think I have this, I'm going to have a conversation with that person that's probably more effective in the time that I have than if I'm having to start from square one. So I would encourage you to use and find those tools and do a checkup from the neck up.
Okay, final question, really brief. The poem that opened up this panel was about all of the exciting things that they got to do since they decided to stay here. And I would like to end on a light note and ask each of you, what is your most exciting thing about being alive?
My kids. My kids are the most exciting thing. Kids are just, they're beautiful humans, and they're ever changing and ever growing, and they're the most exciting thing.
Man, I don't have kids. I don't know how to top. Yeah, it's the people. It's the people in my life. My awesome husband who's here tonight. Just my family. It's the people. It's always the people for me.
Margaret Hines. It's my wife.
I'd have to go with people too, if I can borrow another one. I mean, my last name is Bonds, and I think bonds and connecting is just what I'm all about. And I think it really enriches me to be enlivened by other people, and I sometimes live vicariously through what others are doing.
Okay. Thank you so much, Virginia, Katie, Kevin, and Dr. Bonds for sharing with us. And thank all of you for being here in this space with us. Please feel free to check in with a clinician if you need one, and have an amazing evening.